Hey, Mike.
It,
Oh, Maitreya is here too. Awesome. Hey, Maitreya.
Hare
You
Krishna.
there?
Yeah.
Hey, Krishna.
Hey, bro.
Oh my God, you guys are like, I've just been looking at my Weather Channel app. I saw some cows that were being rescued by skidoos, or no,
Oh.
not jet skis.
Wow.
They're being pulled out of the pastures by jet skis, like near the Canadian border.
Yeah, we got a lot of flooding going on up here.
Oh my God, I was looked at horrible.
are you safe where you are?
Yeah, we're safe. We're up on a mountain. The downtown area where the Skagit River goes by, it's crested way over its banks. And they put up, I just went down and looked at it. They put up a special wall they engineered to keep the water out of the downtown. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that happened in 2004 in my city. It's called, I used to live in an apartment in Carnegie, which is a kind of a borough of Pittsburgh. And it was the Hurricane Ivan. And
Oh, yeah.
it flooded the downtown with about 6 feet of water. A lot of the businesses didn't survive that.
Yeah, my street where I was living on, when I turned on the news that night, there was a boat going down my street. I couldn't get home for over a day when that flood happened.
Oh my
It's
God.
humbling. It's very humbling.
Yeah, at least fortunately, in both places, we lived on a hill. We lived in a hill in Carnegie, and we live in a hill now. I'm going to pick all the hills now. You know, I don't think we're ever moving though, so we don't have
Makes
to
you
worry
feel very
about that.
small and completely helpless. And these
Yeah,
forces of nature comes and
you know, it's like Prabhupada says. You know, the scientists are very proud. They think it can control nature, but you know, they think it can manufacture all these things that we can live on, but they can't manufacture food. And if it stops raining, people will starve. That's basically the bottom line. You know, like in California, it was like that, you know, pretty much. And that's one of the main food resources for the entire nation.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's all, you know, if they would just chant Hare Krishna, then they could solve all their problems. You know, I really believe that, you know, sacrifice comes from rain. Grains are produced by sacrifice. If they chanted Hare Krishna, it would rain. That actually happened in New Vrindavan.
It removes the bodily conception, which is, I mean, if we're identifying the bodies, we're so many orders of magnitude out of whack because we're a tiny spirit soul floating somewhere in the heart of the body. From our real perspective, the heart itself is an unlimited sky. We're so tiny. So you identify with the body and then think you're going to solve the you know, grapple with nature. It's just,
Yeah, right.
No way, man.
It's a little bit puffed up, you know, but the scientists, they build their rockets and they're very proud of all their missiles and everything.
Yeah.
But by a tiny, you know, cataclysm of material nature, it's all finished in a nanosecond, you know.
Even Elon Musk is one of our smartest people from a material point of view, but he thinks that his mission to Mars is to preserve the spark of the consciousness as though that's what it's going to take. Otherwise, consciousness would go away. I mean, it's laudable that someone wants to do something to help others, but there's such a misguided understanding. It's remarkable.
Well, you can't conserve consciousness. I think Walt Disney, he froze his head, like cryogenics.
Yeah.
And, you know, but the soul, once it leaves the body,
future right there.
Once it leaves the body, there's no taking the soul. It goes on, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, Prabhupada used to challenge, like when he was walking in the Pacific Ocean with all his scientists, devotees, he would challenge him. You know, he'd put Sarup Damodar Goswami in the position of a scientist, and he would challenge him. He'd say, you know, oh, if it's a dead body, you know, why don't you just take the chemicals and bring him back to life? What all the body's still there, you know, just take the chemicals and revive the body, but they can't do that. So, you know, it's a fruitless endeavor to try to control material nature. Everything in this material world is destructible. It is evidence of destruction, and so is inevitable. So the best thing to do is get out of the material world and get a spiritual body that's apart from the subtle and gross body. And then you can take that spirit and make it eternal. It is already eternal. It's just transmigrating through these different bodily forms. according to our desires and our karma. But, you know, it's really silly that somebody
Just
has an
listen to
idea.
Elaine
What
says
they're-
all the things we enjoy are going on in the spiritual world, ball dancing and having friends and associating. It's all happening in the spiritual world. It's just it goes on forever. It never stops.
Yeah, but the materialists, they think that the spiritual world must be the opposite of material world, because the material world is like full of bodies and suffering and misery. So they want to negate all that. And so the Buddhists say that they want to, you know, just annihilate the body,
So
make it
Krishna
zero.
comes and performs pastimes, and then the faithful can see the pastimes and there's a better place. Let's go there.
Yeah, well, actually, there is a better place, and it is full of variety. But because they have the opposite conception, they can't really conceptualize it. They can't understand the idea of spiritual variegatedness. They can see the variegatedness of the material world, but not the spiritual world. Hey, you know, we left off right on the verse that you were talking about, Maitreya, that you said you had like an instance of there's verse 28. Let me pull it up here. Now, you said that there was something that happened in your life when you read this verse for the first time, right?
No, it was the Dhruvam Janma Mritasya Cha, the previous verse. I said I remembered where I was on traveling Sankirtan when I had that verse on the card. This one, yeah, Jatastra, he
Yeah,
devoted to. I remember
that was text
the street I was
27.
walking across, what time of day it was, you know, what the air smelled like while I was looking at that card, memorizing the verse. It's such a,
Oh yeah, did you
also
used to
didn't believe
memorize
it was
verses on
possible.
Sankirtan all the time?
Yeah, when I first joined the ashram, I remember coming back after a day on Sankirtan and everyone would recite the verses they memorized. And I thought, uh-oh, they're going to figure out I'm an imposter and I can't do this. And I didn't have any faith I'd be able to do it. And then after taking verse cards up at a couple of days, it was remarkable how by just repeating 3 times the verse, the word for word, the translation.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
I
so
love the
amazingly
Sanskrit and the
fun and easy to
translation.
do.
Krishna really trains you up how to say these things, because actually none of these verses are coming from our mind or from our reading skills. Just like I just got done reading the chapter, the previous chapter was chapter 8, Ramananda Roy's conversation with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Mhm.
And in that it was said that, you know, the devotee, the pure devotee is not saying anything, because and everything he says is perfect. How is that? It's
Yeah.
because Krishna is saying, he's controlling everything in the super soul in the heart. He's saying everything.
Yeah.
Ramananda Roy wasn't saying anything. I said, I'm just a puppet on the string. You're putting these words in my mouth.
One of my old godbrothers, he manages a project now in Puri. He gave a podcast and he was going over some of the verses in the Gopi-gītā where the gopis are saying things about Krishna. And he was pointing out that it's ingenious, perfect poetry. And the gopis are just pouring their hearts out. They never studied Sanskrit. They never studied poetry. And yet just by being pure devotees of Krishna, knowledge and everything is automatically there. It's
right. I mean, when Lord Chaitanya left to go to Navadvip, or to Jagannath Puri, you know, his mother was lamenting, you know, I mean, she was like crushed, but they made an arrangement. He said, okay, well, he should be near me, you know, Navadvip's not too far from Jagannath Puri. And so all the devotees heard that proposal by Sachimata, and they said, everything that you say is exactly like Shastra. We accept it as total Vedic conclusions of truth. You know, so that's why it says, you know, a woman, a Vaishya, Sudra, anybody can become a guru. All you have to do is know the science of Krishna. You don't even really have to understand all the words or anything. You know, you just have to, just like when that one, you know, illiterate Brahmin was reading the Bhagavad-gītā upside down, everybody was laughing at him, and he was crying. And Lord Chaitanya said, what are you reading? And what are you doing? And he said, well, my Guru Maharaj told me that to read this Bhagavad-gītā, but I can't read. And so, but I was just, he said, what does affect your emotions so much? He said, well, when I think of Krishna and Arjuna, and Krishna is like instructing Arjuna, just tears come to my eyes, because it's such a wonderful relationship that they have, you know. And Lord Chaitanya said, you are actually understanding the Bhagavad-gītā. So, Yeah, I just got done reading that chapter, Ramananda Roy. That's really deep stuff, and I actually put it on my Facebook page.
I saw
You know
that.
what you said about it? You said, go deeper.
Yeah.
So every time every time Roy said something, Prabhu would say, hashtag go deeper. That was my description of, I had a picture of Ramananda Roy and Lord Chaitanya on the bank of the river there.
That's
And
a quintessential example of churning the nectar, stirring the
Oh
pot.
yeah. And
cooking down the
it says in that chapter, it says when they churned the nectar, it said those two were not even like churning the nectar. Another example that they actually use in that chapter is like they're miners. They mine for various metals, and they
right.
start out with copper, and then it goes to like brass, and then silver, and then the highest metal. The fourth one is gold, and then beyond that is Transcendental Touchstone, which is the essence of all metal. And that is the transcendental position of Srimati Radharani. And so they're like miners. They're just like digging away and finding all these valuable jewels and gold and silver. And, that is a good analogy too. But anyway, let's get started here before we waste all the time. Fortunately, I was able to pull this up before you came in. I couldn't see the screen. So, but now we're at 28, and I believe we're at the purport. Maitreya, you want to read the purport, the first paragraph of the purport? It's right here. It says, accepting that there are two classes.
Accepting that there are two classes of philosophers, one believing in the existence of the soul and the other not believing in the existence of the soul, there is no cause for lamentation in either case. Non-believers in the existence of the soul are called atheists by followers of Vedic wisdom. Yet, even if, for argument's sake, we accept this atheistic theory, there is still no cause for lamentation. Apart from the separate existence of the soul, the material elements remain unmanifested before creation. From this subtle state of non-manifestation comes manifestation, just as from ether, from air, fire is generated, from fire, water is generated, and from water, earth becomes manifested. From the earth, many varieties of manifestations take place. Take, for example, a big skyscraper manifested from the earth. When it is dismantled, the manifestation becomes again unmanifested and remains as atoms in the ultimate stage. The law of conservation of energy remains, but in course of time, things are manifested and unmanifested. That is the difference. What cause is there for lamentation in either stage of manifestation or unmanifestation? Somehow or other, even in unmanifested stage, things are not lost. Both at the beginning and at the end, all elements remain unmanifested, and only in the middle they are manifested. And this does not make any real material difference.
You want to read the next paragraph, Mike?
Sure. And if we accept the Vedic conclusion as stated in the Bhagavad-gītā that these material bodies are perishable in due course of time, anvanta imi deha, but that the soul is eternal, nitya śikṣāṣtaka saririna, then we must remember always that the body is like a dress. Therefore, why lament the changing of a dress? The material body has no factual existence in relation to the eternal soul. It is something like a dream. In a dream, we may think of flying in the sky or sitting on a chariot as a king. But when we wake up, we can see that we are neither in the sky nor seated on the chariot. The Vedic wisdom encourages self-realization on the basis of the non-existence of the material body. Therefore, in either case, whether one believes in the existence of the soul or does not believe in the existence of the soul, there is no cause for lamentation for loss of the body.
I'm just reading, this part of the first paragraph. There's two classes of philosophers. One believes in the soul and the other disbelieves in the existence of the soul. And I was just reading in chapter 9, which is the next chapter after Ramananda Roy. Can you see this screen here? The Chaitanya Charitamrita?
Mm-hmm.
Am I sharing that with you? Scrolling up. But okay, so Lord Chaitanya actually, when he was on tour in South India, he would meet all kinds of people, different philosophers. There's so many different philosophies in India. And then there's the non-devotees and Mayavadis and all these different people. But then one time, he met these Buddhists, and the Buddhists, he defeated them soundly. I mean, there's really no way you can actually convert somebody by logic and argument. But Prabhupada says, that you have to be willing. Some people only understand the logic and argument, but you have to be prepared to, argue with them on the basis of reason and logic, and then defeat them, because that's what Lord Chaitanya did. The Buddhists accept the idea that the world is not real, but it is real, and here's the examples. The creation is eternal, and therefore there's no need to accept a creator. That's why they're atheists, basically. But Buddha had a vision, but he had a purpose, but he was an atheist because he didn't accept the Vedas. Cosmic manifestation is false, and all these different things. But there's 9 different points that these Buddhists came up to him and started arguing with him. And it says most of these people do not believe in the authority of the Vedas, and nevertheless they accept intellectual speculation and argument. Therefore, the preachers of Krishna consciousness should be prepared to defeat others by argument, just as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did. And so, but after the problem is that there was some blowback. I don't know if you remember this pastime, Maitreya, but
The big bird and the tray of untouchable.
there's a big
items.
bird, and he took, they tried to pollute. They said, this is Mahaprasadam. We're going to give you this Mahaprasadam. It wasn't Mahaprasadam, because atheists can't offer anything to Krishna, so it's not Mahaprasadam. But he took the this big bird before Lord Chaitanya, could even touch it. Big bird picked up and flew over and picked up the plate and dropped it on the Buddhist's head, the big Buddhist's head, because they were actually trying to retaliate against being defeated by Lord Chaitanya, and so it didn't work.
They were rascals. The fact they were Buddhists is almost secondary. They were demons.
Yeah, well, they were. It was like, people don't like being humiliated, and Lord Chaitanya just wanted to take them down a few notches. Like their ego was too high, so
It can be good to know these arguments, because oftentimes the people in the audience that are hearing the argument, the person that you're arguing against may or may not be convinced, but other innocent persons who are a little bit on the edge, one way or another, their intelligence is still developing. By hearing a strong argument put forward by a realized Vaishnava can help their intelligence become more solid and developed.
right. I mean, that's what Prabhupada exemplified. All these other wishy-washy religions, like the Christians, they actually transformed their own Bible in order to fit the version of creation of the modern scientists, and they actually watered down their version. But Prabhupada didn't water anything down. He said, the more you kick on Darwin's face, the more you worship Radha and Krishna.
Yeah. I don't have any desire to put down Christians. I still feel that I'm a Christian. My first guru was Jesus, and his teachings were very simple, the ones that I've appreciated. He said, all the law and the prophets can be summarized as love God with your heart and treat your brother as yourself. And that's Bhagavad Dharma.
Philosophy. It's a beautiful thing, and I was just reading in the Bhagavad, the notes on the Bhagavad by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he said, he was talking about one philosopher in India who was trying to find the truth and conglomerate that with the Indian tradition. And he was looking into Jesus himself, but he said one thing. It said, you should never criticize a guru from another group on the basis of calumny. You know what calumny means?
Yeah, just argument, just to say it's.
Well, it's like a character assassination. That's
a little
is
different than calumny, but yeah.
It's not productive, and so we don't criticize anyone else's tradition, but on the basis of Sanatana Dharma, which is non-sectarian, which is based on the actual principle of Dharma, which is service. Everyone's serving somebody, so we base that on a universal essence of religion. But it requires an open mind and a listening because otherwise in these different religions will never agree with each other, because they go at the absolute truth from a different perspective, and they follow their mental path to that mountain of truth. So you have to actually have a very generous
People are moving. Yeah. I went to the airport every day. There was a Muslim janitor there, and I would say Hare Krishna, and he would respectfully nod his head. And one day I was just inspired, and I said, Allahu Akbar. And he looked at me with a big smile on his face and a tear in his eye, and he came up and he hugged me. And then he said, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So from that day forward, I would say Allahu Akbar, and he would say Hare Krishna in the most enthusiastic way ever. It was marvelous.
Nice. Yeah, that's the way to win over people's hearts and minds, just recognize where they're coming from, and then just try to increase their faith and understand that it's like a mountain. We're all looking at the truth from a different viewpoint. The Plato is looking at from the West, and Confucius and Vyas from the East, and all these other Western philosophers like, from farther West, and maybe Confucius from farther East, but it's the same truth. It doesn't matter what's part, in Christ, there is no East or West, it's just one truth. And so the essence of truth can be understood if you have an open mind and a generous soul, that it can actually acknowledge other people's realizations and fan that little spark. That's what I mean. Kirtanananda tried to do that, in his interfaith dialogue, and it worked a little bit, but you can't like throw all that all out and just say that's not really Krishna consciousness. You take whatever thought is existing, and then you build on that, because it can be, a path to the truth.
We're so blessed to have and given us these books that are, we're just more blessed than we'll ever be able to realize.
Oh yeah, there's
having
no
the association of a pure devotee from the spiritual world giving us these eternal truths is. Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." So when we have darshan of the deity, we can realize that the more we're chanting purely and following the process given by the disciplic succession, then we're actually seeing Krishna. We're experiencing the absolute truth.
Yeah, I mean, I used to think that maybe I've read a lot of books, and I thought maybe I'm a big preacher, but these aren't my books. They're not, when I go in front of Radha Vrindavan Chandra, I think this is not my movement. This is Krishna's movement. It's his philosophy. I'm just repeating it. And all these books, you can actually learn how to become a powerful preacher, but you don't have to memorize. You don't have to memorize so much. You just have to accept it as coming from Krishna, exactly the way he's presenting it. And then without trying to spin it in your own way or argue in your own way or put any kind of emotion in it.
Oh yeah, no, they're definitely not arguments. It's an ocean of nectar we can surface and dive in. Prabhupada wrote so much, and he called the purports his emotional ecstasies. So if it was all just argument and logic, it wouldn't be so enjoyable.
Oh, exactly. But, certain cases, you do have to be prepared. And that's why I appreciate Prabhupada's, he was like, he was a fighter, in certain ways. And you can defend Krishna consciousness from so many different angles. When you actually understand
that right in the preface, he said by reading the first 9 cantos, one will be prepared to defend oneself from the onslaught of atheists.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I mean, you have to be prepared, because a lot of times, Emerson used to say, it's like, some people can understand what this philosophy is, but they can't, there's some phlegm in their system that it can't come out in words. So you have to be able to actually present it. And that's the difference between a first-class devotee and a second-class devotee. Second-class or third-class devotee. Third-class devotee, he has some faith, but he can't really put it into words, to actually convince somebody else. But these aren't our words. And as long as we recognize that and utilize it in Krishna's service, then we can, like Lord Chaitanya said, or Prabhupada said in relation to the devotees, he said, we have to figure out the ways and means to inject Krishna consciousness into the dull minds of the materialists. And the devotees of Lord Chaitanya are very expert in doing that. they're dynamic in their presentation, and they're always looking for new ways to do that, and that's the method of preaching. But it's not our method; it's actually Krishna's method. But we're just using different ways. The Lord Chaitanya's devotees were always coming up with new ways to present things, and Krishna helps. When you have Krishna on your side, how can you be defeated? I mean, it's not a matter of side. It's just that he's the truth, period. End of story. This next verse, Mike, you want to read the
I think we're on 29. Are we on 29?
Oh, we're on 29. Okay, I forgot where we were. Yeah, read the Sanskrit synonyms.
Scharyavat pasyati kaschidinam, Ascharyavat vadati tathaiva chanya, Ascharyavat chainam anyasnoti, Srutvapi inam veda na chayava kaschit. Synonyms: Ascharyavat, as amazing, pasyati, sees, kaschit, someone, inam, the soul, Ascharyavat, as amazing, vadati, speaks of, tatha, thus, eva, certainly, cha, also, anya, another, Ascharyavat, similarly amazing, cha, also, anam, this soul, anya, another, sroti, hears of, shrutva, having heard, api, even, anam, this soul, veda, knows, na, never, cha, and, eva, certainly, kaschit, someone. Translation: some look on the soul as amazing, some describe him as amazing, and some hear of him as amazing, while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. Quick question: how come this was in some of the verses we were looking at on Monday? Souls being referred to as him. I mean, it was my understanding that like all spirit souls are actually feminine,
Right.
and in their essence.
That's just terminology. It's not, I mean, when you speak of man comes from the word Manu. Manu is the progenitor, the original progenitor of mankind. So I guess it's kind of like a patriarchal system of.
Yeah, it's a convention in English. That's all.
Yeah, it's
And
a convention.
If you read in the third canto, which Prabhupada was in a big hurry to translate because he was working on several other things, the translations mostly came from the Gita press, and they're very anglicized, more so than his other verses. He told the devotees, never mind, go ahead and print them anyway. So he comes from that, and so this way of referring to the soul as him is just an English convention.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a conventional term of referring to a person, the spirit inside. It's not. It doesn't have any gender because
Alternate
we're not the body.
pronouns movement was not really in swing when Srila Prabhupada was working.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like, I mean, that was, I don't know if Prabhupada would have been a little bit more careful in his wording, because, but.
My wife works as a social worker at a shelter, and she has referred to some people by their pronouns, which is different than anything I've ever heard of or am used to. And this is like, okay, I have to really.
Pronoun, what do you mean?
Some people like being referred to as they rather than him or her.
Oh, yeah, that's just like a gender thing, gender neutral. It, maybe. Yeah.
So anyway, no one was talking about that, at least definitely not in the mainstream when Srila Prabhupada was writing these translations of purport. So it was not on.
Right. I mean, it's just like, but you can understand because, see, even though it might be a little bit archaic and coming from a patriarchal terminology, still we can understand the essence because Krishna is the source of all the knowledge behind it. It doesn't really matter what the word is, because we're all just like little babies, toddlers. We can't.
From a philosophical point of view, it wouldn't have been incorrect because, as Mike Guru pointed out, we are in relation to Krishna, we're a feminine. So if Prabhupada had used the word her instead, it actually wouldn't have been any less correct than using him. It's just, the convention is simply an English.
Yeah, a lot of people are pretty misogynist though. So maybe a lot of people would have been upset by that.
Oh,
and
Prabhupada upset a lot of people who are misogynistic for sure.
I mean, when
they blame him.
George Harrison wrote that song, Something, it was originally her, not him, or it was originally him. something in the way he moves. And actually he had to change it because maybe some people thought he was gay or something,
You mentioned a play that you mentioned the other day, something Much Ado About Nothing. And that,
Right.
that is not making a big deal out of nothing. Nothing in that context refers to vagina of a woman. And that play means making a big deal about sex with women. So
Right.
it's a good to know that before we go saying Much Ado About Nothing out of context. It's
Well,
it was a way of getting
most
around the
men,
censors at the time.
most men are afraid of vaginas. That's why they they're so misogynistic. They want to control, and they're extremely afraid. And they
That's a
probably
good
should
point.
be.
So Prabhupada wasn't, in the things that he says that some people want to ascribe to that, he had no fear of anything. So
No, yeah.
it's coming from a much different place.
So why don't you read the purport there, Maitreya?
Since Gita Upanishad is largely based on the principles of the Upanishads, it is not surprising to also find this passage in the Katha Upanishad 127. Shravanapyap bahubir navo yano labhya shinvantopi bahavo yam navidyu ascharya vakto kushalosya labla ascharya gyata kushma nushishita. The fact that the atomic soul is within the body of a gigantic animal, in the body of a gigantic banyan tree, and also in the microbe germs, millions and billions of which occupy only an inch of space, it is certainly very amazing. Men with a poor fund of knowledge and men who are not austere cannot understand the wonders of the individual atomic spark of spirit, even though it is explained by the greatest authority of knowledge, who imparted lessons even to Brahma, the first living being in the universe. Owing to a gross material conception of things, most men in this age cannot imagine how such a small particle can become both so great and so small. So men look at the soul proper as wonderful, either by constitution or by description. Illusioned by the material energy, people are so engrossed in subject matters for sense gratification that they have very little time to understand the question of self-understanding, even though it is a fact that without this self-understanding, all activities result in ultimate defeat in the struggle for existence. Perhaps they have no idea that one must think of the soul and thus make a solution to the material miseries. You want me to finish, or you want to read the second?
Mike, you can read the next paragraph and I'll read the last one.
Sure. Some people who are inclined to hear about the soul may be attending lectures in good association, but sometimes owing to ignorance, they are misguided by acceptance of the supersoul and the atomic soul as one without distinction of magnitude. It is very difficult to find a man who perfectly understands the position of the supersoul, the atomic soul, the respective functions and relationships, and all other major and minor details. And it is still more difficult to find a man who has actually derived full benefit from knowledge of the soul and who is able to describe the position of the soul in different aspects. But if somehow or other one is able to understand the subject matter of the soul, then one's life is successful.
The easiest process for understanding the subject matter of the self, however, is to accept the statements of Bhagavad-gītā spoken by the greatest authority, Lord Krishna, without being deviated by other theories. But it also requires a great deal of penance and sacrifice, either in this life or in the previous ones, before one is able to accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna can, however, be known by such by the causeless mercy of the pure devotees and by no other way. I mean, this reminds me of what Prabhupada used to do. I mean, he would go to like a place called like MIT. You know what MIT is? Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
Yeah,
and he would give a lecture there, and he would ask the students, is there any department or any program or any class that discusses the principle of the spirit soul, who we are as a self? And they would just like look at him with a blank stare on their face, because there is no, and Prabhupada would often say that there is no educational institution in this whole world that talks about this subject matter. But, Krishna talks about it in this book, and we can actually understand exactly what the soul is. And it is amazing. The soul in and of itself is an amazing thing because it's part and parcel of Krishna. You can't really understand it completely. But if you understand a small particle of the soul, then you can understand when when it's uncovered by understanding who Krishna is, and Krishna tells you who you are. It's like the sun coming out in the morning. You can look at yourself in the mirror and see.
Maybe you can help solve a seeming conundrum. In the last paragraph, he says three different things that appear to be contradictory. He says the easiest process for understanding the subject matter of the self is to accept the statements of Bhagavad-gītā spoken by the greatest authority, Lord Krishna. But then he says it also requires a great deal of penance and sacrifice. Either you have to have done it in this life or in a previous life. But in the last sentence, he says, can you scroll up a little bit? He says, Krishna can, however, be known as such. You got to scroll down so I can see the last paragraph.
Scroll down.
Well, I want to see, there we go. And the last sentence, he says, Krishna can, however, be known as such by the causeless mercy of the pure devotee and by no other way. So he's appeared to said three different contradictory things in this last
paragraph. The first thing that he said is, the first thing that he said was what? He's understood by the Vedas.
He said is to accept the statements of the Bhagavad-gītā spoken by the greatest authority, Lord Krishna.
And what is the second method?
A great deal of penance and sacrifice, either in this life or previous lives.
Yeah, well.
And at the end, he says, but however, you can really only do it by the causeless mercy of a pure devotee and by no other way.
Yeah, so how do you become a devotee? How do you meet a devotee? You meet the devotee by doing, by somehow or other, executing all kinds of pious activities. Somehow or other, you desire to meet a devotee, and then Krishna introduces, when you want a devotee to understand everything, then Krishna will send a devotee to you to describe everything to you. And then what is that?
Okay, so meeting the devotee is actually the end of the process.
What does the devotee say? He says, surrender to Krishna. He says exactly what's in the Bhagavad-gītā. So the three things, and you can only understand Krishna through the devotee. And that's also true,
When it talks about, with spoken by the greatest authority without being deviated by other theories.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Prabhupada did this as it is. And I mean, if there's, a pure devotee, I mean, it would certainly be Srila Prabhupada. And so, it was his mercy distributing even just this Gita to us as it is. So
yeah, Lord Chaitanya was also, Lord Chaitanya said, all you become devotees, you become gurus, actually. And Lord Chaitanya was successful. He converted the entire subcontinent of India and the South India. And the thing is, we're also somewhat successful in our presentation of the Bhagavad-gītā because we're following in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya. So if we're following in the footsteps of Krishna and Lord Chaitanya, who is combined Radha and Krishna, he can give us the access to this knowledge. And, if you want the ultimate truth, then you have to follow in the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya, who can introduce you to the following in the footsteps of the gopis. And that's like the highest.
So I think it's sometimes following the footsteps sounds like there's a culty sound to that just clear your mind and just accept what these people are saying and don't think too much. But at the end of this purport, in these three sentences, Srila Prabhupada is forcing us to think through this, because these are contradictory statements. And to comprehend this, really, you have to start praying at some point, because you don't get it just by applying the intellect. It won't work.
But the idea of following in the footsteps is not culty. You might think it's culty because
it sounds a little culty to me when people say, "Oh, just accept." Don't. It sounds like they're saying,
well, you have to follow. You can't follow blindly.
That's why I like Prabhupada's purports. Is that he's obviously expecting us to be intelligent and to think these things through. So ultimately, you do have to have the causeless mercy of a pure devotee, and there's no other way. But it doesn't come as just a free handout. You have to work for it.
Yeah, well, I was actually thinking about writing a book, following in the footsteps of devotees, and to have a picture of behind the footsteps of this devotee with a dhoti on going up these ancient steps. It is actually one of the main pillars of our philosophy. It's a very personal process.
It's a sublime idea.
And
when someone's going up a hill, if you follow in their footsteps, you'll eventually attain the same platform. But when they reach the top, you can do things on the top of the hill that you can't try on the way up, right? So you have to just follow in the footsteps and get to that level. If you try to imitate, you'll just fall down the mountain.
Yeah,
So
well, it's
following
a
the footsteps is an
process of
important
actually
idea.
descending knowledge from the disciplic succession. And you can only rise as far